Chapter 13. The chapter describes two accounts of a UFO, or the same UFO, that happened in Maine in December 10, 2016. So there were two different witnesses, but it was a similar UFO. So the first account is of a man walking his dogs around 4:30 in the morning, and he was walking his German Shepherds, and all of a sudden he sees like three craft in the sky, and two of them, they were like triangular, and they had lights like at the bottom, and the other one was like a large. He describes it as the size of a football stadium, and it was just massive. And what was strange was that there was like a force field. He describes it as a force field around this craft, and it had like three kind of like headlights on the front, and it had like a yellow glow coming from the rear, and they were flying really low and really slow. Like they were saying that maybe like 200 miles per hour, which is like much slower than like a commercial aircraft. And something odd that he described is that as the craft was approaching, there was no sound. And when the craft was above him, he could hear like a strange sound. And then when the craft was moving away from him, he heard no sound again. And his dogs became afraid. And what's strange was that as the craft was approaching, he was feeling ill, and he was feeling like nausea and fear and anxiety. And like he got other symptoms that lasted like a month, like chronic fatigue and aches in his joints. And they developed, like, he says that he was traumatized whenever he heard like a jet on the sky. And he was just basically saying that the crafts, they were like traveling like really low. Like he says that his house is like 1,000 feet high, and that these crafts were around like 3,000 feet above the ground. And the other sighting happened in Windsor, which is also Maine. The first account happened in Bowen, And the second account happened in Windsor, which happened around 40 minutes later. There was this man and his wife, and he was gonna drop his wife to work, and then she sees out of the window like a large triangular craft with 5 lights beneath it, and they describe it as a carpenter's frame tool, which is basically like a triangle, like the edges of a triangle without the bottom edge, that shape. So they pulled over to get a good look, and they mentioned that this craft was traveling slowly above the power lines, and that the altitude was around 200 to 300 feet, and the craft wasn't going that fast. They mentioned that maybe after 10 minutes the craft basically was out of sight. And they mentioned that it was pretty big. Like it was like 2 to 3 times the size of the moon. Like they describe it as moving effortlessly in the sky, like a boat behaves when it's in the water. And they also mentioned that the craft was silent, but after the craft passed them, they heard like a rumble sound. And they also mentioned that when the craft was approaching them, they both felt nauseous. And the wife struggled later that day at work that she felt nauseous and was vomiting. And the husband also felt nauseous for a couple of hours after the sighting. And the chapter basically ends comparing the two events, and they both had a lot of similarities. The second account also mentions that there was like a field around the craft, and they describe it similar as when you see like these waves when the weather's really hot, and there's like a shimmering effect like on the road, and you see like waves of heat in the road. That's the way they describe the force field of the second craft. And the author, by the way, these are accounts from MUFON, and they give them like a MUFON number. And the author of the book, which apparently was a member of MUFON from Maine, he interviews the witnesses, and he says that they came off as credible. And these two cases were closed, and MUFON describes the case as unknown, and it turns out that the author is the state director of MUFON for Maine, and he just closes the case as unknown. And they also mentioned that later that day, like on Baldwin, the city of Baldwin, where the first sighting happened, there was a lot of reports or a lot of ambulance calls of people getting anxiety or and heart attacks the next day. So it was basically something about the aircraft that was making other people sick.